With the success of Game of Thrones, HBO was keen to find another series that could replicate the fervor around their fantasy epic, and they nearly had it with this science fiction series. The list of replacements for Game of Thrones since the series ended is wanting, with no fantasy series coming close to the critical highs of GOT. That's not even to mention the pop culture footprint that Game of Thrones left. There are only a handful of series that can claim a black hole-like effect, dominating office conversations, online message boards, and everywhere in between. Lost came close, but it's The Sopranos that's probably the best comparison. If you're counting, that's 2 HBO series that have dominated television. Naturally, any profit-minded network wouldn't be content to sit back and relax after these victories. They'd want another hit show. HBO nearly had it too, with a science fiction mystery, but it couldn't quite get the series on track. Westworld was the closest thing HBO had to a new Game of Thrones. The science fiction series was similarly epic and engaging. Westworld could have been the next show to take the baton from Game of Thrones, premiering in October 2016, a few months after Game of Thrones Season 6 aired. That first season of Westworld was an exciting development, a big-budget science fiction series with a fantastic cast and a gripping mystery. Based on Michael Crichton's 1973 film Westworld, the series is set in the year 2050, where the technology company Delos has built several theme parks, all designed for human guests to interact with hosts, biomechanical robots virtually indistinguishable from humans, allowing visitors to roleplay their most horrific fantasies. However, these robotic hosts soon begin to show signs of sentience. It becomes difficult to tell human from host, and suddenly, all the pain and suffering inflicted on an emotionless being takes on a grave reality. There were mysteries aplenty in Westworld, but it wisely kept the actual puzzles relatively condensed. The central pillar of Westworld is not hard to understand: hosts have gained sentience. That's all there is to it. That central tenet allows other intriguing questions to be raised, however. House of the Dragon may be the replacement for GOT now, but at one time, the crown was there for Westworld to take. Westworld Season 1 was a masterpiece that gave Game of Thrones serious competition. The science fiction series had an engrossing first 10 episodes. Robert Ford, Anthony Hopkins, standing on the beach in front of 2 hosts in Westworld. Westworld premiered to 1.963 million viewers, with an average of 1.822 million viewers for that first season, and currently has an 87% on Rotten Tomatoes, via TV series finale. In Season 6, Game of Thrones had an average of 7.94 million viewers, via TV series finale. Remember, we're comparing Westworld to one of the greatest shows ever. However, Season 1 of Game of Thrones looked a little more like Season 1 of Westworld, with an average of 2.52 million viewers, via TV by the numbers. The first season of Game of Thrones also had a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. But more than any numbers or ratings, it just felt like the big show people were waiting for. There were major actors involved including Ed Harris, Jeffrey Wright, and Anthony Hopkins, and lesser-known but talented stars like Jimmy Simpson, Evan Rachel Wood, and Thandai Newton. The show asked big questions and the answers were never straightforward. That first season is as good as science fiction TV gets. Westworld got going quickly with its plot, and yet had plenty of time to develop its ensemble of characters. One of the original great triumphs of Game of Thrones was its ability to balance the incredible and fantastical plot elements with character moments that forced you to care about more than just dragons and ice zombies. Westworld managed to capture that in its first season. The music, the production, the acting, the dialogue, the writing, and whatever else you can think of, combined to form an incredible season of television. No one expected Westworld to go downhill so fast. Season 2 became far too complex. Ben Barnes as Logan from Westworld smirking. While I still contend that Westworld is a worthwhile 4-season watch, with only Season 2 and a few episodes in the later seasons truly dragging it down, even I have to admit that Seasons 2 to 4 were a letdown overall. What was worse was that Westworld's decline came out of nowhere when it began to happen. Season 1 ended on a strong note. The actors were all signed on to stay, the series was quickly renewed, and there didn't seem to be any red flags with Westworld that would suggest production was having trouble. Season 2 of Westworld was as well set up as any other series and yet it still dropped the ball. However, the plot of Westworld became increasingly confused and unnecessarily complex. The series lost sight of that central pillar. Suddenly, the simple idea that the hosts had gained sentience was thrown into question, or at least that core fact was obscured and questioned, and not in a way that helped the show. It was hard for Westworld to come back after that, and while Season 3 was an improvement, it felt like a very different show, now taking place outside the park. In order to tighten up the story, a welcome feat, Westworld had to shed some of the aspects that made it unique in the first place. The series ended up eating itself, and few fans stuck around for Season 3, much less Season 4. Even worse, Westworld was cancelled before its final season could air, leaving even more questions for viewers. No show may ever replace Game of Thrones, but it's still a shame to see one with potential trip over itself.